This street is exactly 1,000 feet long. That's about 3 football fields end to end. That's it. But for 500 years, through dynasties, French colonial rule, wars, and even the years of the centrally planned economy, this street has never truly changed its trade. It has always done one thing: silver.
Okay guys, I'm standing in Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam, and more specifically in the area locals call the Old Quarter. Let me give you some perspective, but the craziest thing isn't its age, it's how the streets got their names. Think about street names in America: Fifth Avenue, Main Street, Elm Street, numbers, trees, names that usually tell you nothing about what actually happens there. Hanoi is completely different. Here, the street name was basically the store sign. This area is traditionally known as the 36 Streets. 36 streets, and in theory, each street specialized in just one trade. Only one. Hang Moi, Salt Street, it sold salt. Hang Dong, Copper Street, copperware. Hang Mon, Bamboo Blind Street. Hang Chiu, Mat Street, famous for woven rush mats. Thuoc Bac, an entire street lined with traditional herbal medicine shops. Imagine a whole block of pharmacies, except it has been around since the 15th century. And then there's the street I'm standing on right now, Hang Bok, Silver Street. If you're from New York, think of the Diamond District on 47th Street, an entire area packed with diamonds, gold, and jewelry. If you're from London, think Hatton Garden. Same basic idea, except New York's Diamond District is roughly a century old. Hang Bok is more than 500 years old.
And the first question I had when I came here was simple. Why? Who organizes an entire city like this? It turns out the answer is deeply human. Centuries ago, people from rural villages came to Hanoi to make a living, but they didn't necessarily come alone. They came together. Relatives, neighbors, sometimes entire groups from the same village moved into the city. When they arrived, they built their homes next to one another, opened shops beside one another, and practiced the same craft their home village was known for. There's an old Vietnamese saying that captures this perfectly: Bun ko ban, ban ko phở. Loosely translated, don't do business alone.
It sounds simple, but multiply that idea across hundreds of years and you get an entire city naturally organizing itself into specialized craft streets. No master plan, no zoning department, just communities staying together and building their livelihoods around the skills they shared. Some streets, of course, were named after legends or historical events associated with those places, but that's another video. And here's where this system becomes really fascinating. It completely shaped the way Hanoians shopped. Need bamboo blinds? You didn't open an app, you went to Hang Mine. Need traditional herbal medicine? Go to Thuoc Bac. Need a pair of woven mats? Hang Chiu. You didn't search for a store, you searched for the street. The entire street was the store. I've traveled through quite a few capitals around the world, and I can tell you, I've rarely seen anywhere preserve this commercial logic quite like Hanoi.
But now I have to be honest with you. That beautiful system, it's slowly disappearing. Walk through the Old Quarter today, and many streets still carry the names of their original trades. But behind those old names, you'll now find cafes, clothing stores, phone shops, and homestays. And really, that shouldn't surprise anyone. Times change, consumer habits change. Not many people buy traditional rush mats for their beds anymore. The same thing happens in historic districts all over the world. But, and this is exactly why I wanted to make this video, some streets refuse to let go. Hang Ma is still associated with traditional paper offerings. Hang Mon still has bamboo blinds. You can still find traces of the old trades on Hang Chiu and Hang Bang. And Hang Bok? Hang Bak has barely moved. So why has this particular street survived? To understand that, I needed to meet two people. One is preserving its past. The other is preserving its skills. Let's start with the first. He's a young architect from an old Hanoi family, and he has an obsession. For nearly 5 years, he searched Vietnamese and international websites, archives, collections, basically every source he could find, looking for old photographs of Hanoi. The result? Nearly 2,000 photographs. If you're in the US, you've probably seen those YouTube channels that restore and colorize old historical photographs. Imagine something like that, except for an entire city, done by one person, entirely voluntarily. At first, he told me, his collection was a mess. Whenever he found an interesting photograph, he saved it into a folder. That was it. No title, no date, no order. So he spent an enormous amount of time reorganizing everything by subject and chronology. Eventually, he divided the archive into 4 major sections. The most important one he calls Thang Long Kay Cho.
Thang Long is Hanoi's ancient name, often translated as ascending dragon. Kay Cho was a traditional popular name associated with Hanoi's bustling commercial center, essentially the marketplace. Within that collection are photographs of the 36 streets, today's Old Quarter, the historic 13 camps on the outskirts of the old city, the French planned quarter, which locals often refer to as the Old Streets, and the historic outskirts of Hanoi. But this next part is what really impressed me. Many of those photographs had faded, blurred, or deteriorated over time, so he spent more than a year doing one thing, restoring them in Photoshop. 1 year, 2,000 photographs, one person. It takes an almost obsessive level of patience and attention to detail. And interestingly, that is exactly the same spirit you're about to see in Hanoi's silversmiths. Among those photographs are numerous images of Hang Bac and the goldsmiths and silversmiths who once worked here. Some of them have rarely, if ever, been seen publicly. He also pointed out something I would never have noticed on my own. After studying historical maps of Hanoi from different periods, he realized that Hang Bac's location was anything but accidental. Together with Ma Mei and Hang Buom streets, Hang Bac forms an arc around the eastern side of the Old Quarter's historic commercial spine, Hang Dao, Hang Nang, Hang Duom, and Dong Xuan. That arc sat close to the Red River, close to the river wharves, close to the place where goods and money entered the city. In other words, this was prime real estate, 15th century style. There was another important distinction. Hang Nang and Hang Buom historically had substantial Chinese merchant communities. Hang Bac, by contrast, was overwhelmingly Vietnamese and connected directly toward the Cao-Go commercial axis. It became an important gateway for Vietnamese commerce within the Old Quarter. This street didn't just make silver.
It was a gateway. Now, let's actually walk down the street. Hang Bac is nearly 300 meters long, roughly 1,000 feet. You can walk the entire thing in about 3 minutes, and it's only about a 5-minute walk from Hon Kim Lake. But along these 300 meters, 3 different trades once existed side by side, and they fit together like gears in a machine. The first was silver ingot casting. This is the part that surprised me most. This street didn't just make jewelry, it once made currency. Silver ingots were standardized pieces of silver used as a means of payment. This craft was brought here by people from Chao Kay village. Chao Kay historically belonged to Binh Giang district in Hai Duong province. Following Vietnam's 2025 provincial administrative reorganization, Hai Duong became part of Haiphong. So if you look at a modern map of Vietnam, Chao Kay is now in Haiphong, roughly a 90-minute drive east of Hanoi. The second trade was silver exchange, and the Chao Kay community did this too. They exchanged copper coins for silver ingots, broke larger quantities of silver into smaller pieces for everyday transactions, and converted them back when customers needed larger amounts. Basically, this was a currency exchange booth, like the ones you see at airports, except this was the 15th century, and the currency was actual metal.
That's why, when the French arrived and renamed Hanoi streets in French, they called this one Rue des Changeurs, Street of the Money Changers. It wasn't until 1945 that the name Hang Bac officially returned. The third trade was goldsmithing and silversmithing. And this craft had 3 major techniques. Cham, chasing and engraving. Patterns and decorative motifs are carved or hammered into gold and silver surfaces. Dao, filigree. Gold or silver is drawn into extremely fine threads, bent into flowers, leaves, birds, and other delicate shapes, and then attached to the jewelry.
This is the most difficult technique. And finally, Tron, plain finishing. No engraving or elaborate decoration. The surface is simply worked until it becomes perfectly smooth and polished. The jewelry craft here was brought by artisans from 2 other villages. The first was Din Kong, historically part of Tong Tri District and now Din Kong Ward in Hanoi, only about 20 minutes from where I'm standing. We'll go there in a minute. The second was Dong Som, historically in Taibing Province. Following the 2025 administrative reorganization, Taibing became part of Hengyan Province, meaning Dong Som is now in Hengyan, roughly 2 hours southeast of Hanoi. 3 villages. 3 trades. 1 300-meter street. 1 community specialized in production. Another specialized in buying and selling. Together, they created a street that was constantly moving. Historically, researchers believe Hang Bac took shape during the Lei dynasty, or perhaps slightly earlier. By the 19th century, under the Nguyen dynasty, the street belonged to Dun To Vaj in Tho Song district. Following Hanoi's 2025 administrative restructuring, the former Hoan Kim district was reorganized, and Hang Bac is now located in Hoan Kim Ward, Hanoi. Keep that in mind because your Google Maps may still show some of the older administrative names. I spoke with several families living along the street, and almost every household is still involved in gold, silver, or jewelry. One longtime resident told me, in the old days, Hang Bac was quiet and very simple. Most houses were only 1 or 2 stories high with tiled roofs. A lot has changed since then, but people here have still managed to preserve the identity of the old quarter, the gold and silver trade. And here's something interesting. Demand for jewelry has grown, so business here is actually doing pretty well. This street isn't barely surviving. It's alive and thriving.
But there has been one major change. In the past, a shop on Hang Bac was both a workshop and a storefront. The owner was the craftsman. He hammered and soldered behind the counter, then sold the finished piece to the customer standing in front of him. Today, most businesses primarily operate as retail stores. Only a small number of craftsmen still rent space here for repairs and custom work, often serving the jewelers themselves. Some families have moved into completely different parts of the industry while still remaining connected to the craft. For example, I found a shop specializing in tools and machinery for jewelers, polishing machines, and all kinds of equipment used by goldsmiths and silversmiths. Think about that. It's still the same old ecosystem. It has simply moved one step along the supply chain, from selling the finished product to selling the tools used to make it. The street evolved, but it never abandoned its trade.
Now look up. Seriously, when you're walking through Hanoi, always remember to look up. Hang Bac has 2 particularly distinctive architectural forms. The first is the tube house, extremely narrow at the front but stretching deep into the block. Some houses have facades only 3 meters wide but extend as far as 60 meters. The traditional explanation is simple. Property taxes were once calculated according to street frontage, so people built narrow and deep. Something similar happened in Amsterdam. If you've ever been to the Netherlands, the idea may look familiar. The second form is the traditional multi-layered roof structure, with overlapping roof sections and ventilation spaces between them. But the building I really want you to see is at 42 Hang Bac Street. This is Kim Gan Communal House. Kim Gan literally means gold and silver. It is one of Hanoi's historic communal houses and is dedicated to the founding ancestor of the jewelry craft. In the West, we have the idea of medieval craft guilds. In many ways, Kim Gan functioned like a guild hall for the goldsmiths and silversmiths of Thong Long. Except it wasn't merely a place to meet. It was also sacred space.
Walk through that gate, and suddenly, the motorcycle horns outside seem to disappear. Inside, there is timber, incense smoke, centuries-old wooden pillars. And the people who work in the gold and silver trade here, even those who now sell machinery rather than jewelry, still carry a deep connection to the ancestors of their craft. And that, I think, is the real answer to the question I asked at the beginning. This street didn't survive simply because of economics. It survived because it had somewhere to return to. International visitors to Hanoi often spend a surprising amount of time around Hang Bac. Now I understand why. It feels ancient, but it also feels sacred. Still, to understand the whole story, I had to leave the old quarter. I had to find the source. 20 minutes south of Hoan Kiem Lake, I arrive in Din Quang. Once, this was agricultural land on Hanoi's outskirts. Today, the city has swallowed it completely. Din Quang is now an urban ward surrounded by high-rise apartment buildings. But this place is regarded as one of the ancestral homes of Vietnam's traditional jewelry craft.
One artisan put it simply, this is the ancestral home of Vietnam's jewelry craft. We have 3 founding masters here. For generations, for centuries, the craft has been passed from father to son. I am also one of those who inherited it through many generations.
And now, let me tell you the legend. We're going back to the 6th century, during the reign of Lai Nam Day. To put that into perspective for a Western audience, the Western Roman Empire had only recently fallen. England did not yet exist as a unified kingdom. Muhammad had not yet been born. In Ding Quang village lived 3 brothers from the Tran family, Tran Hoa, Tran Dien, and Tran Dien. They were extraordinarily skillful and hardworking. They learned how to work with gold and silver, then opened a workshop called Kim Hoan. Their craftsmanship became so refined that their reputation spread far beyond the village. But this is the important part, and it's what makes this story different from many craft legends I've heard. They didn't keep the secret to themselves. The 3 brothers taught the craft to the entire village. The whole community learned. And from that point forward, goldsmithing and silversmithing were passed from one generation to the next in Din Quang. Later generations built a temple honoring the 3 Tran brothers as the founding masters of the craft. Every year, on the 12th day of the 2nd lunar month, usually around March on the Western calendar, the village holds a festival in their honor. If you're planning to visit Vietnam in spring, that's one date worth checking. But 1,000 years is never a straight line.
And one artisan told me about a chapter of this story that very few travel videos ever mention. In the past, almost everyone in Din Quang Thuong knew the craft. For some, it supplemented farming income. For others, it became their primary livelihood. This was still an agricultural community, so during the off-season, people worked with silver. Many families were farmers and silversmiths at the same time. Then came 1964. State controls over gold and silver tightened. Gold became heavily restricted, and the craft here almost flatlined for more than 20 years. It was not until around 1985, as Vietnam began moving toward a more open, multi-sector economy, that the jewelry craft gradually started recovering. 21 years, almost an entire generation without practicing the craft. Think about how dangerous that is for a traditional skill. If a craft fails to pass through a single generation, it can disappear forever. No book can preserve what the fingertips know. But this one didn't disappear. Some families quietly kept it alive. And something else happened. When the craft returned, it returned differently. Because gold remained restricted, Din Quang increasingly focused on silver, which was easier to work with on a broader scale. And that is one reason Din Quang became especially renowned for silver filigree. A limitation became an identity. I was invited into the home of Quoch Von Trong, whose family is among those still practicing the craft in Din Quang Tuong. The first question I asked was, what does it take to do this? He told me, first, you have to be hardworking and persistent. Second, you have to be creative. This is a traditional handicraft, so the artisan has to be incredibly meticulous, especially with filigree, because the details are extremely small. Some details are so tiny that you can't see them clearly with the naked eye. You need magnification.
Think about that. Too small to see with the naked eye. This is the silver wire they use. It can be finer than a human hair. They bend it by hand into flowers and butterfly wings, then solder each tiny element onto the frame. A single piece may contain hundreds of individual details. Now let me explain the 3 core techniques, because once you understand these, you understand the craft. First, chom, chasing and engraving patterns into gold and silver. Hammering, carving, raised lines, recessed lines. Second, dao, filigree. Gold or silver is melted, drawn into extremely fine wire, then bent into flowers, leaves,
birds, and other intricate forms before being attached to the piece. This is the most difficult technique and the signature specialty of Din Kong.
Third, Tron. Plain finishing. There is no engraving. The surface is simply polished until perfectly smooth. It sounds like the easiest technique. But getting a silver surface completely flawless, that's anything but easy. And to be considered a truly accomplished jeweler here, you're expected to master all three techniques, as well as traditional metallurgical methods. Not one, all three. And now we come to my favorite part, because this sounds almost like an ancient recipe. Once a silver object has been shaped, the craftsman rub the silver with sand, brush it with a mixture of potash and lime, heat it over a flame, let it cool, then immerse it in a boiling alum solution, scrub it with sand again, and finally, polish with pieces of broken glass. Broken glass, that's the final step used to create that shine. No industrial polishing system. Sand, fire, lime, and broken glass. The products made here generally fall into three categories.
The first is jewelry, bracelets, earrings, and necklaces. But the workshop owner pointed out an important distinction. Elsewhere, many jewelers produce plain chains made from interlocking links. Here, artisans create floral chains and butterfly patterns, original designs shaped from fine silver wire.
As he explained, at the same time, we listen to our customers and understand their tastes, so we can create designs that suit what they want.
The second category is decorative art. Silver plates, tea sets, boxes, fans, silver pictures. The third is functional decorative craftwork, objects that are both beautiful and useful. Business card cases, jewelry boxes, pieces that can be displayed but also used. In other words, these artisans aren't surviving on nostalgia. They're designing for customers today. And then came the moment that made me stop for a second. I met the artisan's son, a young man.
And this is what he told me. Our family's jewelry craft has always been passed down from one generation to the next. I learned from my father, and my father learned from my grandfather. That's how every generation teaches the next and passes the craft on. There was a time when my father was the only person in our family still practicing the craft. I realized how precious this tradition was, and my father is a highly skilled artisan, so I decided to follow in his footsteps and help preserve it. I've been working with my father for 6 or 7 years now. I will definitely continue preserving and developing the craft. I want more people in Vietnam and around the world to discover Din Kong silver filigree, to understand just how intricate this handmade work is, and to help preserve a tradition with more than 1,000 years of history.
At one point, only one person in the entire family was still practicing the craft. One person. A chain stretching across 1,000 years had become as thin as a single human life. And then, a young man chose to reconnect it. Okay, let me wrap this up. When I first came here, I thought I was going to make a video about a charming old commercial street in Asia, something light, a travel story. But what I actually found was a thread that begins with 3 brothers in a village in the 6th century, 3 men who chose to teach their craft to an entire community instead of keeping their knowledge to themselves. It passes through generations of farmers who worked with silver between harvests. It travels north into Hanoi and settles along exactly 300 meters of road beside an ancient riverport. It survives the Lei dynasty, the Nguyen dynasty,
French colonial rule, when the street was renamed Rue des Changeurs, and 21 years when the craft almost disappeared. And today, that thread is still running, quite literally through the hands of a young man sitting beside his father, bending a strand of silver finer than a human hair. Look closely at every pattern and every tiny detail, and you see 3 things: patience, skill, creativity. Gold rings, silver bracelets, shimmering works of art, ancient communal houses hidden in the heart of the city.
Together, they create something uniquely Hanoi. Hang Bac, the old craft street, and Din Kong, the village that keeps its craftsmanship alive. So if you come to Hanoi, don't just walk through Hang Bac and take a picture. Step inside 42 Hang Bac Street. Stand in the courtyard of Kim Gong Communal House for a minute. Then take a 20-minute ride down to Ding Kong and watch the artisans at work. Because these places are not museums, they are still open for business. And that may be the most extraordinary thing about them. If you found this video useful, leave a like and tell me in the comments, does your city have a street where almost everyone once practiced or still practices the same trade? I genuinely love to know. See you in the next episode.